Okay, so I got to start off by saying I'm super impressed that you went from all caps yelling and shouting to actually just a couple words all caps and actually opening up your mind a little bit and asking inquisitive questions rather than just expecting or insisting that you know the whole situation when you clearly don't, okay? So, since you don't, I'll play some more for you. I told you this, I had a lot to go through with this. This is just part one, but let's go to part two, I guess. Thank you for your segue and the support. It helps me out a lot.
Barco was sent for counseling at a private clinic in Colorado Springs because Fort Carson didn't have enough psychiatrists to treat its own soldiers. After a couple of visits, he says he stopped showing up and stopped taking his medication. He was drinking heavily and carrying weapons.
It was a bad idea. I don't need to be, around guns or anything like that. When people get back from Iraq, especially like the infantry guys, they buy out the gun stores. I didn't go like that. I just bought like a handgun or something like that. Crazy. I'm not gun crazy.
On April 25th, 2008, Jose Barco, the defendant in this case, went to a party.
4 months after he got back from Iraq, Barco got into an argument at a party in Colorado Springs.
The defendant then pulled out the .357 Magnum from his belt, pointed in the air in a room full of 20 or 30.
He was thrown out of the house after shooting at the ceiling.
Fired one shot.
He drove off and then circled back to the house.
Off of the road, the other
6 shots were fired from his car. One bullet narrowly missed a young man. Another hit a pregnant woman in the leg.
We ask you to find him guilty on all counts.
Barco was convicted on 2 counts of attempted murder. In sentencing, his lawyers would try to argue that the judge should take into account his combat injuries. After multiple concussions from roadside bombs, he'd been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Doctors are still trying to understand their potential long-term effects.
TBI most sensitively affects executive functioning. That part of the brain that we use for judgment and we use for decision making when we are in situations of intense emotion. So if a person is affected, they don't have the controls that they had before.
Military psychiatrist Stephen Xenakis has studied how traumatic brain injuries can affect behavior. He thinks there may be a link between Barco's injuries and his crimes.
We have someone who's been emotionally traumatized and they've got PTSD. They're anxious and they're depressed. And they've got TBI, which means that they've got problems in decision making. They can't think as clearly. And they're really vulnerable to just reacting, overreacting, maybe doing something that they had done when they'd been in combat.
We are asking the court to impose a minimum sentence given the situation that Mr. Barco has with his medical condition, mental health, and his service to this country. It is important to know he has a diagnosis of PTSD. He also has some traumatic brain injury from the numerous explosions that he was subject to during his combat service in Iraq. So we are asking the court to impose a minimum sentence.
The defense also presented extracts from Barco's medical records. But the judge was to rule that his injuries did not mitigate his crimes.
This was a stupid, angry, and impulsive act. I expect young gang members who are at war with each other to do drive-by shootings. Somebody who's been in Iraq and is a military veteran, I don't expect that type of behavior from. In fact, it brings considerable discredit upon the uniform that you wore to be engaged in that type of activity. Accordingly, I have to impose a sentence that is appropriate to the level of crime that you committed. As to criminal attempt to commit murder in the first degree, I'll impose a 20-year Department of Corrections sentence. To the second count of criminal attempt to commit murder in the first degree against Ginny Stefanik, I'll impose 32 years in the Department of Corrections. By operation of law, those sentences have to run consecutive to one another.
Barco was sentenced to a total of 52 years behind bars.
This judge was asked for some leniency for Jose's military experience. What the judge did instead was went harder on him because of his military experience. Sgt Jose Barco was unanimously pardoned in 15 years of his 52-year sentence. Why? For good behavior. This kid went in, institutionalized, figured out the system. How could I help? Where can I be an asset? He taught other inmates math and English, and due to his good behavior, was a unanimous decision at his parole hearing because they all knew he didn't belong there, especially when you pair all that based off of his military service. Purple Heart recipient. This is a shame. This is a travesty. Big day on Tuesday. Jose needs your support. Please sign the petition. I'll link it on the bottom. Donald Trump's day one ICE deportation of a Purple Hart Combat veteran. It's disgusting. It is utterly disgusting. Follow me for more.